A gorilla stole a lion cub and treated him like his own. What happened next will move you to tears. In the vast expanse of the African savanna, where life and death play out under the scorching sun, something extraordinary unfolded. Something no wildlife expert had ever seen before. A massive silverback gorilla emerged from the dense edge of the forest, cradling in his arms not one of his own kind, but a fragile, helpless lion cub, barely old enough to walk. The cub's mother was nowhere in sight, and the gorilla's behavior defied every natural instinct anyone thought they understood. What began as a moment of shock soon became a breathtaking story of unexpected compassion, unlikely family, and a bond that would challenge everything we think we know about the wild. By the end, you'll see the savanna and its creatures in a way you never have before. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more inspiring stories like this one, and share the most heartwarming moments from nature that the world needs to see. The heat of the late afternoon hung heavy over the savanna, the air shimmering above the endless stretch of golden grass. In the distance, the low calls of doves mixed with the distant rumble of hooves as a herd of antelope grazed near the riverbank. It was a picture of the wild in perfect balance, until the cries of a young lion cub broke through the steady hum of life. Daniel Hartley, a 38-year-old wildlife researcher from Montana, had been in Kenya for almost a year, studying predator-prey dynamics. His camp, a modest setup of canvas tents and solar panels, was perched on a low ridge overlooking the Mara River. He was used to seeing nature at its most raw. Lions hunting, elephants mourning, hyenas stealing kills. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what he was about to witness. He was adjusting the lens of his camera when he first heard it, a strange, high-pitched sound, almost like a baby's wail. Daniel froze, scanning the tall grass below. The cry came again, closer this time, and his trained eyes caught movement. A small lion cub stumbled into view, its golden fur matted, its legs unsteady. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Daniel's first thought was that the cub had wandered too far from its mother. In this part of the savanna, that meant certain death. Predators, both feline and canine, patrolled every corner, and even a few minutes alone could be fatal for a cub this young. But then the grass behind the cub parted, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. A massive silverback gorilla stepped into the open. Daniel's brain scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. Gorillas didn't live in the savanna. They belonged to dense forests far to the west. Yet this one was here, towering over the cub, his dark eyes fixed on it. Daniel expected aggression. Maybe the gorilla would chase the cub away. But instead, the giant knelt down, one massive hand reaching out. The cub froze, its tiny body trembling. Then, in the gentlest motion Daniel had ever seen from a wild animal that size, the gorilla scooped the cub into his arms. Daniel's fingers hovered over the camera trigger, but for a moment, he forgot to take the shot. His mind raced. Was this a kidnapping? A rescue? The gorilla cradled the cub against his chest the way a human might hold an infant, shielding it from the open plain. For nearly a full minute, Daniel just watched, stunned. The gorilla glanced around, scanning the horizon as if expecting someone or something to appear. Then, with the cub still in his arms, he turned and walked toward the line of acacia trees at the savanna's edge. Daniel's instinct screamed to follow. He grabbed his camera, slung it over his shoulder, and moved down the ridge, keeping to the cover of tall grass. Every step felt unreal. He trailed the gorilla for nearly half a mile until they reached the shaded forest belt that separated the open grasslands from the denser vegetation beyond. Daniel crouched low, heart pounding. The gorilla stopped at a clearing where sunlight filtered to the canopy, creating patches of gold on the forest floor. There, he sat down against the base of a wide-trunked tree, still holding the cub. Daniel could hear the cub's small, plaintive mews and the deep, steady rumble of the gorilla's breathing. The gorilla gently groomed the cub's fur, pulling away burrs and dry grass with surprising precision. Daniel knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, an apex predator's young in the care of an herbivorous primate. It defied everything in the textbooks. But there was another problem. If the cub's mother was alive, she would be searching for it. And a lioness protecting her cub was one of the most dangerous animals on earth. Daniel's eyes swept the savanna behind him, searching for movement. A sudden rustle in the grass made him freeze. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of two lionesses emerging from the open plain, their bodies low to the ground, eyes locked on the gorilla. Daniel's pulse spiked. The gorilla noticed him too. He stood up, still holding the cub, and let out a deep, resonant grunt that carried across the clearing. The lionesses slowed, clearly uncertain. They had likely never encountered gorilla before, and his sheer size and posture made him an intimidating presence. But intimidation wouldn't last forever. Daniel could see the tension in the lionesses' movements. They were calculating, and Daniel knew that if they decided to charge, the gorilla would have no choice but to defend himself or abandon the cub. For a long moment, the three stood frozen in a silent standoff. Predator, protector, and intruder. Then the gorilla did something even more shocking. He turned his body sideways, shielding the cub completely from the lioness's view, and let out a sharp bark-like sound. It wasn't aggression. It was almost a warning to stay back. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't random. The gorilla was making a choice. He was claiming the cub. One of the lionesses took a step forward, muscles coiling. And in that instant, the gorilla bared his teeth, a low roar rolling from deep in his chest. It wasn't the roar of a lion, but it was enough to make the lioness hesitate. The other lioness glanced at her companion, then back toward the horizon. After a tense few seconds, both turned and retreated into grass, disappearing as suddenly as they'd appeared. The gorilla didn't move for a long while. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, his huge frame blocking the cub from all sides. Only when he seemed certain the threat had passed did he sit down again, rocking the cub gently in his arms. Daniel, still hidden, finally exhaled. His hands shook as he adjusted his camera and began to shoot. He knew the world would need to see this, not just as a curiosity, but as proof that the natural world still had secrets humans barely understood. But a question burned in his mind. Why? Why would a gorilla cross into savanna, risk confrontation with apex predators, and take a cub that wasn't his own species? As Daniel clicked through the shots, the gorilla lifted the cub and rested its tiny head against his shoulder. The cub's eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion overtaking fear. Daniel lowered his camera. This wasn't about territory or instinct or survival. This was something else entirely. And Daniel knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening here, it was only the beginning. The night was alive with sound. Hyenas hooped in the distance. Crickets sang from the tall grass. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a lion's roar rolled like thunder. Yet under the acacia tree, in a clearing on the edge of the savanna, a silence unlike any Daniel Hartley had ever experienced wrapped around him. The silverback gorilla had curled his massive body around the tiny lion cub, shielding it from the cool air. Daniel, crouched behind a tangle of brush, barely dared to breathe. He had seen the ferocity of lions, the cunning of hyenas, the might of elephants, but this? A gorilla cradling a cub of his fiercest rival predator? It felt like a dream. At dawn, the light spilled across the horizon in a band of molten gold. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes, half expecting to see the cub abandoned and the gorilla gone. But there they were, rising together as though the night had bound them. The gorilla stretched, then nudged the cub awake with gentle precision. The cub mewed weakly, its legs trembling as it tried to stand. Without hesitation, the gorilla bent down and lifted it once more. Daniel whispered into his recorder, August 18th. Gorilla continues to show signs of parental care. Grooming, vocal reassurance, protection. Behavior unprecedented. His voice trembled, his disbelief palpable even in the words he spoke. For hours, he followed them at a cautious distance. Across shallow streams and through belts of fig trees, he watched the gorilla, who he began to call Baraka, meaning blessing, adapt his every movement for the cub's sake. He swatted insects from its face, shaded it beneath his massive hand, and scanned the grasslands constantly for threats. The cub, small and fragile, grew quieter each day. Daniel named him too, Nuru meaning light. But Daniel also saw the cracks in this impossible bond. By the third day, Nuru's steps were slower. His cries grew faint. He needed his mother's milk, something Baraka could never give. Daniel's chest tightened every time he saw the cub stumble, his little body weaker than before. One afternoon, Baraka brought Nuru to a shallow pool, dipped his fingers into the water, and let droplets fall into the cub's mouth. Nuru lapped them eagerly. It wasn't enough. Daniel recorded softly, his heart breaking. The gorilla is improvising, offering water, comfort, but the cub is starving. Unless something changes soon, he won't survive. That night, back in his tent, Daniel lay awake staring at the canvas ceiling. His pack of emergency supplies sat inches away. Inside it, powdered milk formula left over from a cheetah rescue in Namibia. He had promised himself he wouldn't interfere unless it meant life or death. But wasn't that exactly what this was becoming? The next morning, he made his decision. He found Baraka and Nuru near a dry riverbed. Nuru lay on the ground, barely moving, while Baraka hovered protectively above him, his dark eyes filled with something Daniel swore looked like worry. Daniel stepped into the clearing slowly, his palms raised, his voice steady but soft. "Easy, big guy. I'm not here to hurt him. I'm here to help." Baraka's head snapped up, muscles tightening, a warning grunt vibrating through his chest. He planted his feet, shielding Nuru completely. Daniel froze. His heart hammered, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he reached into his pack, pulled out a small bottle already filled with formula, and crouched low. Carefully, he set it on the ground and pushed it forward, then backed away with his hands still visible. Baraka stared at the strange object, nostrils flaring. His gaze flicked from the bottle to Daniel, then back to the cub. For a long, terrible moment, the clearing was filled only with the sound of wind rustling the grass. Then Nuru gave a faint, pitiful cry. Baraka bent down, picked up the bottle clumsily in his huge hand, and held it near the cub's mouth. Daniel's breath caught as Nuru latched onto the rubber tip and began to suck greedily. The gorilla adjusted his grip, surprisingly gentle, and steadied the bottle as the cub drank. His free hand stroked the cub's tiny back with careful patience. Daniel felt his throat tighten. "My God," he whispered. "He understands." The bottle emptied, and Nuru collapsed against Baraka's chest, eyes fluttering closed, belly full for the first time in days. Baraka set the bottle down carefully beside him, then cradled the cub close, rocking him in his arms with a low, soothing hum. Daniel blinked back tears. Against every law of nature, a gorilla was feeding, guarding, and loving a lion cub. He knew he had to share this with the world, but he also knew the world could destroy it. If word spread, poachers, traders, even wildlife officials might intervene, tearing apart this miracle before it had a chance to flourish. The clearing held its breath, as though the entire savannah understood the fragility of this impossible family. Daniel lowered his recorder, his voice hushed. "I'm witnessing something no one will ever believe. But if they find out, this bond could be shattered forever." And for the first time, Daniel wondered if the real danger wasn't predators or starvation, or even the harsh savannah itself. The real danger was humanity discovering what he had found. The savannah stretched endless and golden under the rising sun, but Daniel's world had narrowed to two figures, the massive silverback gorilla and the tiny lion cub he carried against his chest. For a week now, Daniel had tracked them, recording every moment of their improbable bond. Every night, he whispered into his recorder that this was a story too big for the world to miss and too fragile for the world to know. He named them to anchor them in his heart. Baraka, the gorilla, and Nuru, the cub. Blessing and light. Together they were rewriting the laws of nature, and Daniel knew he was witnessing something sacred. But miracles rarely remain hidden for long. That morning, while following across a low ridge, Daniel noticed something new. Fresh tracks in the dirt, boot prints, too large to be his own, pressed deep as though left only hours ago. He crouched, touching the outline. Not rangers. Rangers wore lighter shoes, and besides, they always announced themselves. These prints belonged to men who wanted to move unseen. His chest tightened. Poachers. He scanned the horizon, his camera dangling forgotten at his side. For years he had documented the impact of poaching. Elephants stripped of their tusks, rhinos left to rot in the dust, lion prides decimated for the black market trade. But the thought of someone discovering Baraka and Nuru made his stomach twist. The cub would be seen as a prize, the gorilla a threat. Neither would survive an encounter with hunters. He pressed forward, following at a greater distance than usual. Baraka seemed restless too. The big male paused often, scanning the tall grass, ears twitching. Nuru, perched against his chest, let out a small cry, and Baraka rumbled softly to calm him. Daniel realized with start that the gorilla's instincts might already have sensed what he had just confirmed. They weren't alone anymore. By midday, they reached a small glade shaded by thorn trees. Baraka settled there, plucking berries and offering them to Nuru to chew, though the cub seemed more interested in batting them with his tiny paw. Daniel crouched at the edge of the clearing, smiling despite the tension knotting his stomach. But the smile vanished when he caught movement in the distance. Through his binoculars, he spotted them. Two men crouched low in the grass, rifles slung across their shoulders. They hadn't seen him. Their eyes were locked on the gorilla. Daniel's pulse hammered. He knew he couldn't confront them directly. Armed poachers had no hesitation in silencing anyone who got in their way. Instead, he grabbed his radio, whispering urgently, "Base camp, this is Hartley. Possible poachers spotted north of the Mara River Bend. 2 men, rifles, tracking wildlife. Coordinates to follow." Static answered him. Then a crackle. Copy. Hartley. Rangers dispatched. ETA 30 minutes. Stay hidden. 30 minutes. Daniel swallowed hard. 30 minutes was a lifetime out here. In the clearing, Baraka shifted, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. He gave a low grunt, almost like a warning to the cub nestled against him. Nuru blinked sleepily, unaware of the danger drawing closer. Daniel's hands shook as he considered his options. He could stay put, let the Rangers handle it, and pray Baraka stayed hidden long enough. Or he could do something reckless. His heart screamed for the second option. He pulled out his camera, powered the long-distance flash, and aimed it toward the poachers. The burst of light cracked across the savanna like lightning. Both men jerked in surprise, spinning toward the source. Daniel ducked low, heart pounding. He had revealed himself, but he had also pulled their attention away from Baraka. Through the grass, he heard muffled curses. One voice muttered in Swahili, "There's someone out here." Daniel crawled backward, moving fast and low, hoping to draw them further away. His mind raced. If they found him, what then? But better him than the gorilla and cub. Minutes dragged like hours. At last, he heard the faint whine of engines in the distance. Ranger trucks. Relief washed over him as the poachers stiffened, whispering sharply to each other, then bolted across the plain. Daniel collapsed against the ground, sweat pouring down his face. He had bought them time. But time was fragile. The poachers now knew something unusual lurked in these plains. They would be back, and next time, they might not be so easily spooked. When Daniel finally returned his gaze to the clearing, Baraka was watching him. The gorilla's dark eyes seemed to pierce the grass, meeting Daniel's with unnerving clarity. It was as though he knew, somehow, some way, that Daniel had just risked himself to protect them. Baraka gave a low rumble, then tucked Nuru closer against his chest and disappeared into the trees. Daniel stayed kneeling, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He had crossed the line today, stepping into the fragile balance between observer and participant. But as he replayed the moment of Nuru drinking from that bottle, of Baraka's impossible devotion, he knew he would cross that line again if it meant protecting them, because some stories were too sacred to leave to fate. And this one was only just beginning. The storm that had threatened the savanna all afternoon finally broke at dusk. Rain swept across the plains in heavy sheets, flattening the tall grass and turning the earth into slick, dark mud. Daniel huddled beneath his canvas poncho. His binoculars pressed his face, eyes fixed on a faint outline of Baraka, and Nuru nestled beneath a fig tree. The gorilla had curved his huge frame into a shelter, shielding the cub from the rain as if he were made of stone. Daniel whispered into his recorder, the words almost drowned by the downpour. Day 12. Gorilla continues to guard cub with relentless focus. Storm conditions worsening, but Baraka doesn't move. He's a wall. Yet beneath the awe, dread gnawed at him. The poachers. He hadn't seen them again since the Rangers had chased him off. But Daniel knew men like that didn't give up. They had caught a glimpse of something out here. Something unusual, and hunters never forgot the scent of opportunity. When the rain eased near midnight, the savanna shimmered under a pale, broken moon. Daniel stretched his cramped legs and scanned the horizon once more. That was when he saw it, a faint glimmer of light, far across the plain. A flashlight beam, quickly doused. His stomach clenched. They were back. He slid lower into the grass, heart hammering. The beam appeared again, this time closer, accompanied by the faint crunch of boots on wet earth. Through the binoculars, he made out 3 men now, not 2, rifles strapped to their backs, their movements slow and deliberate. They weren't looking for lions or elephants tonight. They were searching for Baraka. Daniel turned toward the fig tree. Baraka stirred uneasily, nostrils flaring. He rose to his full height, towering in the moonlight, Nuru tucked carefully against his chest. The gorilla rumbled low in his throat, a sound that made even Daniel's skin prickle with unease. He sensed them coming. Daniel had seconds to decide. Stay hidden and hope the Rangers return in time, or intervene again. His hand shook as he unclipped a small flare gun from his belt. Standard issue for emergencies. It could give away his position instantly, but it might also buy precious minutes. The poachers drew closer, their silhouettes stark against the silver grass. One raised a pair of binoculars, scanning the clearing. Daniel's pulse spiked. If they spotted Baraka now, it was over. He raised a flare gun, whispered a prayer, and fired. The red light burst into the sky. Trailing smoke, a sun-bright beacon that split the night. The poachers cursed, startled, one dropping to the ground. The gorilla roared, a sound so deep it rattled Daniel's bones. Baraka stood his ground, massive and immovable, his chest beating like thunder as he dared anything to come closer. Nuru whimpered, curling against him. The flare arced, sputtered, and fell, leaving the world dark again. But the silence didn't last. In the distance, Daniel heard the growl of an engine. The Rangers, racing across the plain toward the signal. Relief warred with fear. Would they arrive before the poachers? The hunters, realizing they'd been exposed, began shouting to each other. Daniel caught fragments of their words in Swahili. The gorilla, the cub, his worst fear confirmed. They knew. Baraka shifted Nuru onto his shoulder and moved with astonishing speed, vanishing into the line of trees. Daniel followed, his legs burning as mud sucked at his boots. Branches toward his arms, shadows swallowing him whole, but he didn't dare stop. Behind him, he heard the crack of a gunshot. Bark splintered near his head, and he dove behind a tree, breath ragged. Another shot rang out, echoing through the night. His heart lurched. Were they aiming at him or at Baraka? Through the chaos, he heard it. Nuru's cry, sharp and frightened. Then Baraka's bellow in answer, a sound that shook the trees. The gorilla wasn't running anymore. He was standing his ground. Daniel crawled forward, mud streaking his face, until he reached the edge of another clearing. There, in the moonlight, he saw it. Baraka looming like a giant, Nuru clutched against his chest, his gaze fixed on the approaching hunters. The men froze at the sight. Even armed, they hesitated before the raw power of a silverback, defending what he considered his own. Daniel raised his hands, shouting with every ounce of force in his lungs. Rangers are coming. You'll be dead men if you fire that gun. The poachers turned their heads, startled by his voice, and in that instant the sound of engines roared closer. Spotlights cut across the trees as ranger trucks barreled into the clearing. Voices shouted commands, rifles cocked. The poachers bolted, vanishing into the brush like shadows swallowed by the night. Baraka didn't move. His massive chest heaved as he kept Nuru tight against him, eyes locked on the humans swarming the clearing. For a terrifying moment, Daniel feared the gorilla would see no difference between poachers and rangers, between hunters and protectors. Then Baraka gave a low, resonant grunt, almost a warning, almost a vow, and turned back into the forest, disappearing with the cub into the darkness. Daniel sank to his knees, trembling. He had saved them again, but at what cost? The secret was slipping away. Too many eyes had seen. Too many whispers would spread. The miracle of Baraka and Nuru's bond would not stay hidden much longer. Morning came with a heavy stillness after the storm. The savannah glistened under a fresh wash of dew, but for Daniel Hartley, the world felt brittle, like glass waiting to crack. He stood beside the ranger trucks that had arrived the night before, their headlights now dimmed, their tires caked with mud. The air still carried the smell of smoke from the flare he had fired. The Rangers had saved them, for now. But as Daniel glanced at the group of uniformed men gathered nearby, he knew another storm was brewing, one far more complicated than bullets and poachers. Captain Omandi, the ranger in charge, approached him, A tall man with lined face and eyes that carried the weight of decades in the bush, Omandi wasted no time on pleasantries. "Dr. Hartley," he said, voice firm, "our men confirmed what you reported. A gorilla here, far from his natural range, and a lion cub in his arms. You understand the situation this creates." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes, I understand it creates the most extraordinary example of cross-species bonding ever recorded. A story the world needs to see." Omandi's eyes narrowed. "Or a problem. Gorillas are not meant to be here. Lions are not meant to be raised by primates. The balance of this ecosystem is already fragile. If word spreads, you know what will follow. Hunters, media, chaos." Daniel's hands clenched. He had feared this. "So were you suggesting that we separate them? Tear the cub from the only protection it has." Omandi did not flinch. "The cub belongs to the lions. If we take it, perhaps it can be reintegrated with a pride. If we leave it, it will never grow as it should. And the gorilla, his presence here is unnatural. We cannot predict what he will do when the cub grows older." Daniel shook his head, his voice rising. "You didn't see what I saw." Baraka, he caught himself, realizing he had used the name he'd given the gorilla, not the clinical distance of scientist. The gorilla has done more than protect Nuru. He's nurtured him, fed him, built nests to keep him warm. I've watched him for days. Captain, that cub trusts him more than he would trust another lioness now. One of the younger rangers stepped closer, curiosity in his voice. "Nuru, you've named the cub." "Yes," Daniel admitted, "because he's not just a cub anymore. He's part of something bigger than himself." Omandi exhaled, his expression tightening. "This is not sentiment, Doctor. This is survival. If poachers know, they'll come back. Next time they won't run from trucks. They'll kill the gorilla and sell the cub for thousands on the black market. You cannot protect them forever." Daniel's mind churned. He pictured Baraka holding the bottle, guiding it to the cub's mouth with those massive hands. He remembered the roar that had sent lionesses fleeing, the way the gorilla's chest had become a fortress around a creature that should have been his enemy. Could the world really justify tearing that apart in the name of balance? "I can't let you do it," Daniel said at last, his voice quiet but firm. The air shifted. The rangers glanced at each other, some with surprise, others with unease. Omandi's tone hardened. "You forget where you are. You are a guest in this land. Doctor, you do not command us." Daniel met his eyes, heart hammering. "And you forget what this means. The world thinks the wild is only brutality, predator against prey. But here is proof that compassion exists even where it should not. If you take that cub away, you're not just destroying their bond, you're destroying hope." For a long moment, silence stretched. Then Omandi sighed, rubbing his temple. "We will not act tonight. We will observe. But if the cub weakens, if the gorilla grows aggressive, we intervene. Do you understand me?" Daniel nodded reluctantly. "I understand." But in his heart, he was already forming another plan. That afternoon, Daniel shadowed Baraka and Nuru again, careful not to let the rangers see how close he got. The gorilla had retreated deeper into the forest, wary after the chaos of the night before. Daniel watched as Baraka climbed a low hill, pausing to let Nuru scramble in the safety of his arms. The cub was stronger now after days of careful feeding. His steps were steadier, his cries louder. For hours, Daniel followed, torn between wonder and dread. Every moment with him felt like a miracle borrowed against time. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows across the grass, Daniel returned to camp, where Omandi awaited him. "You've made your feelings clear," the captain said. "But tomorrow we send word to headquarters. They will want the cub transferred." Daniel's chest tightened. "And the gorilla?" Omandi's eyes hardened. "If he resists, we will do what is necessary." The word struck like a blow. Daniel retreated to his tent, pacing in the dim lamplight. He could not allow it. Baraka had claimed Nuru not as prey, not as possession, but as family. And if humans interfered, the cost would not only be theirs, it would ripple across every lesson the wild had ever taught him. As night settled heavy on the plains, Daniel sat with his head in his hands. His choice was clear: stay silent and watch the bond be destroyed, or risk everything protected. The decision pressed like a stone on his chest. And far beyond the camp, In the darkness of the forest, Baraka lifted his face to the moon. The cub nestled close against him and let out a low, mournful call. Daniel heard it faintly through the night air, and it felt less like an animal's cry than a plea. A plea Daniel knew he could no longer ignore. The dawn was pale, gray, and restless. Clouds drifted low across the horizon, and the savannah stirred with tension that Daniel Hartley could feel deep in his bones. Today was the day. He had overheard the Rangers late in the night. Headquarters had sent instructions. They would move in to capture the cub and, if necessary, neutralize the guerrilla. The words haunted him. Neutralize. Cold, clinical. To them, Baraka was an anomaly. To Daniel, he was proof of something extraordinary. And Nuru was no longer just a cub. He was a symbol of trust, of a miracle that had risen out of the brutality of the wild. Daniel packed quickly, his recorder, his camera, and the last of the formula bottles. He left his tent and walked into the heavy morning air, knowing what he had to do. He could not stand by. Baraka and Nuru were moving toward the riverbank when Daniel found them. Baraka looked tired, his broad shoulders sagging as he carried the cub. Yet when Daniel stepped into the clearing, Baraka's eyes fixed on him with a steadiness that made his chest ache. There was no fear there, only recognition. Daniel crouched low, speaking softly. "They're coming for you, Baraka. They want to take him away. I can't let that happen." The gorilla rumbled deep in his chest, a sound Daniel had come to understand as acknowledgement. Nuru shifted against him, tiny paws clutching Baraka's fur. The moment shattered with the sharp crack of brush behind them. Daniel spun. The Rangers had arrived. Omandi led the line, rifle slung across his chest. His men fanned out in a semicircle. "Step aside, Doctor," Omandi called. His tone was firm, but not unkind. "This has gone far enough. The cub must be returned to its kind. The gorilla cannot keep it." Daniel's pulse hammered. He rose to his feet, planting himself between the men and the gorilla. "Listen to me. You don't understand what you're about to destroy. This bond, this family, defies everything we thought we knew. If you take that cub away, you're not saving him. You're condemning him." One ranger raised his rifle nervously. Baraka growled, clutching Nuru closer. The air thickened. Every second a thread stretched to the breaking point. Omandi raised his hand, signaling his men to hold. His eyes locked on Daniel's. "And if we don't act, Doctor? If we let this continue, what happens when the cub grows? When instinct returns? Lions are killers by nature. Gorillas are not his kind. What then?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Then we trust what we've seen. We trust that compassion can exist even where instinct says it shouldn't. This is bigger than us, Captain. Bigger than science. Bigger than conservation politics. This is hope." The standoff seemed unbreakable until the sound of a gunshot split the air. But it didn't come from the Rangers. From the opposite side of the clearing, 3 figures emerged. Poachers. The same men Daniel had seen before, now bolder, desperate. One fired into the sky, the bullet snapping branches. "Step away," one shouted in Swahili. The gorilla and the cub belonged to us now. Chaos erupted. The Rangers swung toward the new threat, shouting commands. Another shot rang out, striking the ground near Daniel's feet. He stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. Baraka roared. The sound thundered through the clearing, drowning out every other voice. He set Nuru gently on the ground, then surged forward, his massive frame a wall of muscle and fury. The poachers hesitated, their rifles trembling. Even armed, they hadn't expected this. Baraka charged, beating his chest, tearing branches from trees and hurling them with terrifying force. The men scattered, firing blindly as they fled into the brush. The Rangers gave chase, but Daniel stayed rooted, his eyes locked on Baraka. The gorilla returned to Nuru, lifting the cub once more against his chest, breathing heavily. His dark eyes found Daniel's, and for a heartbeat man and beast shared the same thought. We protected him. Omandi returned minutes later, shaking his head. They escaped, but they won't be back soon, not after facing him. His gaze softened as he looked at the gorilla, still cradling the cub. Perhaps you are right, Doctor. Some bonds cannot be broken by force." Daniel's chest eased for the first time in weeks. He turned to the captain, his voice steady. "Then we leave them. Let the wild decide their future. We owe them that much. Omondi hesitated, then gave a single nod. Very well, but this stays secret. If the world learns of this, it will destroy them. Can you keep that promise? Daniel looked at Baraka and Nuru, their silhouettes framed by the morning sun. A picture of love that shouldn't exist and yet did. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Yes, I'll keep it. The Rangers withdrew, their trucks rumbling back across the plain. Daniel remained a while longer, watching as Baraka carried Nuru into the trees. The cub nestled safely against his chest, eyes closed in perfect trust. Daniel lifted his camera, but did not take the shot. Some moments, he realized, weren't meant for the world. They were meant only to remind us that even in the harshest corners of nature, miracles could bloom. As the forest swallowed them from sight, Daniel whispered to the empty clearing, "Take care of him, Baraka, and may the world never take this from you." The wind carried the words away, and Savannah returned to its rhythm. Lions hunting, elephants marching, birds rising into the dawn. Life went on, but Daniel knew he had witnessed something unforgettable. And in that knowledge, in that bond between a gorilla and a lion cub, he found his own kind of hope. If this story inspired you, remember, courage and compassion can change even the wildest of worlds. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who believes that family isn't just who you're born to, but who stands by you when it matters most.